Here's a hoodie and a $50 card, she said, her voice sugar-coated but smug, like she was auditioning for some nepotism-sponsored reality show. That was the moment I knew my career at Viron was over. Not a warning. Not a private conversation. No, the CEO's daughter, Kenzie, chose the quarterly all-hands meeting, with 80 pairs of eyes watching, to slice me out of the company I had practically built from scratch. She handed me the hoodie like it was contaminated, my name scribbled across the tag in black Sharpie, as if I were a piece of lost luggage finally claimed. Tucked inside, a $50 gift card to a juice bar, one that doesn't even exist in my zip code. But the worst part wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't the whispers I felt ripple across the room like static. It was the line she dropped next, casual, like she was tossing crumbs to pigeons. And unfortunately, Claire's Q4 bonus didn't meet the updated KPI rubric, so it will not be awarded updated KPI rubric. I wrote the original KPI rubric, and the bonus they just withheld? It was 6 figures, $100,000. Gone with a smirk. I could feel the weight of every stare. Sales guys adjusting their collars like they suddenly couldn't breathe. The intern row hiding behind their phones. Even the CTO, who had begged me 6 months ago to rebuild our back end from the ground up, was now pretending to read his notes. The only one who looked relaxed was our CFO, probably thinking about the boat he just bought with last year's equity. So I smiled. Not because I wasn't furious, not because it didn't sting, but because fury is for amateurs, and I'm a professional. That smile, calm, steady, terrifying in its restraint, made HR's pulse quicken. They know the smile I'm talking about. The one that silently promises, "Don't worry, I won't sue. Not today." I held up the hoodie. Polyester, scratchy, cheap. Felt like it judged me back. "Thanks for the memories," I said, voice even, almost friendly. No door slam, no meltdown, just the soft click of my heels against the tile as I walked out. That's important, by the way. They wanted a scene. They wanted me to be the crazy woman story they could share on Slack later. I gave them nothing. The air outside felt too clean, too cheerful. Blue sky, warm breeze, like the universe was mocking me. I sat in my car, stared at that hoodie on the passenger seat, and thought, this is how they erase you. One fake smile, one skipped bonus, and a hoodie stuffed with silence. But here's what no one in that glossy conference room noticed. HR didn't have me sign anything. No exit packet, no NDA reminder, no acknowledgement that my termination was fair and legal. Just a cheery pre-written email saying my company account would be shut down at 3 p.m. sharp. And that small oversight? That was my opening. Because 3 weeks earlier, I had already prepared for this. I'd been sitting in a booth at a bar that smelled like old fries and regret, my laptop balanced dangerously close to a glass of cheap Pinot. Across from me, my attorney, Shelley. Real attorney, not the listening ear corporate like to parade out when someone raised a complaint. Shelley leaned over my screen, pearls glinting under neon beer signs, and whistled. "Claire, are you sure you want to go through with this?" I nodded. Calm, certain. They've been treating me like an employee. But I've been acting like an owner. Time to get some insurance. That insurance? A clause. Buried so deep in our vendor contracts, it practically wore camouflage. Clause 14.3a. It tied my employment directly to the licensing of the very platform the company ran on. The platform I had built through my LLC, quietly invoicing under operations architecture and integration. If they terminated me without formal review and documented cause, the license revoked instantly. No lawsuit, no arbitration, no warning, lights out. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it legal? Absolutely. That night, while Kenzie rehearsed her Instagram live about gratitude rituals, I was encrypting backups, notarizing contracts, and placing one printed copy of that clause in a fireproof box in my attic. So when she handed me a hoodie and tried to erase my legacy with a $50 juice card, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I thought one thing: activate clause. Because walking out of that office wasn't an ending. It was the trigger. And Kenzie? She had just pulled it herself. 3 weeks before the hoodie hit my desk, I was already preparing for the worst. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Because when you've been in corporate long enough, you can feel when the winds shift. The sudden change in meeting invites. The way your monthly reports stop being circulated. The way people you trained begin speaking over you, parroting your own ideas back to you like they invented them. It's not subtle. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And Kenzie, our CEO's daughter, wasn't exactly subtle. She floated into Viren straight from a lifestyle blog, armed with pastel blazers, buzzwords about radical alignment, and the confidence of someone who had never had a performance review in her life. She didn't need to earn respect. She inherited it. And she decided I was in her way. At first, it was the small things: my name disappearing from project updates, my seat accidentally missing from strategy sessions, budget approvals routed through new culture committees stacked with her friends from yoga. She never came at me directly. She didn't have the spine for that. No. Her weapons were passive aggression and vague jargon. If I flagged a problem in a meeting, she'd tilt her head and say, "I think Claire's perspective comes from a scarcity mindset." Scarcity mindset. I was trying to keep us solvent while she billed the company for team healing ceremonies that were basically drum circles in the break room. That's when I started documenting. Every suspicious Slack deletion. Every wellness vendor invoice that turned out to be a DJ or a palm reader. Every payroll anomaly that somehow benefited her circle. I didn't dump it into the company drive where it could vanish. I kept it in private folders, color-coded, encrypted, backed up twice. One folder even had a joke label: Petty Cash and Petty Queens. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed protection. That's when I called Shelley, my attorney. 42, cynical, pearls like brass knuckles. She'd seen more boardroom betrayals than most TV dramas. We met at a dive bar, laptops open between half-eaten fries. "Claire," she said, scrolling through the contract on my screen, "this is elegant. You sure you want to use it?" "Not yet," I told her, "but I want the safety net." The clause was simple, buried deep in our vendor consolidation contract. While everyone else obsessed over flashy UI updates and sales funnels, I had quietly rebuilt our back-end architecture. Clean, scalable, mine. And here's the kicker. I built it through my LLC. On the ledger, it looked like just another vendor. Ops, architecture, and integration. Nobody noticed when the invoices shifted. Nobody read the fine print. Clause 14.3a. In plain English: if the company terminated me without formal review and documented cause, the perpetual license to the entire back-end stack revoked instantly. No court battles. No arbitration. Just gone. It passed through legal without a question, rubber-stamped by a department too busy drowning in red lines to notice one more paragraph. I didn't want to use it. Let's be clear. I loved my work. The systems, the build, the people who actually cared. But every time Kenzie smiled with those bleached veneers and called me Claire Bear in meetings like I was her pet, I felt the trigger twitch. And when I caught her deleting budget reallocation messages from Slack, I knew the countdown had begun. So when HR fired me with a hoodie and a juice card, without signatures, without process, I knew exactly what they'd skipped over. I walked out calm, sat in my car, opened my personal laptop, the one I never connected to company Wi-Fi. On it, a very specific file in a very specific encrypted partition, labeled simply Clause 14.3a trigger.pdf. I didn't hit send. Not yet. Timing is everything. Because here's the thing. When you leave a company like that, silence is scarier than rage. Rage they can spin as bitterness. Silence? Silence makes them paranoid. It makes them wonder what you know, who you're talking to, what's about to drop. And sure enough, within days, cracks began to show. The finance team accidentally sent a corrected revenue projection off by $900,000. They blamed API issues, but I knew the truth. They didn't understand the two-step audit process I'd designed. I never gave them the playbook. Then came the tech unraveling. A microservice collapsed during a client demo. The DevOps contractor, handpicked by Kenzie because he ran vision board sessions, couldn't even navigate the schema. My naming conventions were a foreign language to him. Meanwhile, customers started tweeting about delayed fulfillment. The trust was leaking. And me? I stayed silent. No updates on LinkedIn, no rage posts, no cryptic subtweets. Just gone. Because I knew what they didn't. Behind the scenes, Monolith Capital was preparing to pour $50 million into our Series B, and due diligence was already underway. Every spreadsheet, every vendor agreement, every contract was being combed through with a magnifying glass. And buried in those contracts, quiet and invisible, was my clause. Kenzie thought she'd erased me with a hoodie. But what she'd actually done was flip a switch she didn't even know existed. And soon, that switch would light up the entire boardroom. It started with whispers. 2 days after I left, my phone buzzed with a message from a former teammate. "Claire, did you know the finance team is panicking? They can't reconcile Q4 numbers." I didn't answer. I never do. Silence unnerves people more than words. By the end of that week, Monolith Capital had begun their due diligence for the Series B round. $50 million was on the table. Every contract, every vendor agreement, every licensing clause was being dissected. And suddenly, Viron's polished exterior was looking less like glass and more like ice. Cracks spreading if you knew where to look. The first crack came from finance. A revised revenue projection landed in Monolith's inbox, short by almost $1 million. The excuse? QuickBooks API delays. The truth? They didn't know how to run the reconciliation system I'd built, because I never gave them the full playbook. Why would I? You don't hand blueprints to the people sharpening guillotines. Then came operations. 3 microservices collapsed during a client trial. The DevOps contractor, Kenzie's friend from some vision board retreat, couldn't navigate the schema. My architecture was solid, but it required context. Knowledge management doesn't happen by osmosis. I'd warned them months ago. They ignored me. Meanwhile, customers started tweeting about missed deadlines and delayed onboarding. Nothing tanks investor confidence faster than screenshots of angry clients. And Kenzie? She did what Kenzie always did. She spun. In a leadership video, she called it a growth recalibration phase. She insisted the team was stepping into a new vision of operational sovereignty. Corporate poetry for "we have no idea what we're doing." She wore a sweatshirt that read, #, "do the work." Irony so thick it could choke a room. But here's the thing about investors. They're not idiots. They've seen the jargon before. What they want is stability, predictability, numbers that add up. And when those numbers don't, they start asking questions. One Tuesday night, while I was baking banana bread in my kitchen, my GitHub notifications pinged. A repo I hadn't touched in weeks, my LLC's private repository, was suddenly getting traffic. 6 hits in a row, all from Viron IP addresses. I laughed out loud. They were sniffing around my code, trying to piece together what I'd left behind. But of course, what they didn't know was that the core license had already shifted. Clause 14.3a was live, a quiet bomb ticking under their boardroom table. I didn't reach out, didn't gloat, just let them stew. Because sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. The following morning, my attorney Shelley called. "They're circling," she said. Her tone was half amusement, half warning. I got a ping from an external counsel. Informal, of course. They wanted to know if you'd consider a consulting arrangement. I smiled into my coffee. "And what did you say?" I told them my client isn't available for informal anything. If they want access, they'll need to talk about terms. Shelley never wasted words. That's why I trusted her. Meanwhile, inside Viron, paranoia was brewing. A junior PMI once mentored sent me a single message. Everything feel unstable. Like we're walking on glass. She wasn't wrong, but the real fracture came during Monolith's diligence call. One of their analysts flagged a line item in the vendor contracts. Ops Architecture and Integration, Ray Systems LLC. It was small, ordinary looking, but they highlighted it. Yellow, bold. And that's when the silence began spreading through the executive floor like smoke. I wasn't in the room, but I can imagine it. The CEO's jaw tightening, Kenzie's practiced smile slipping, legal scrambling for binders. Because buried inside that vendor contract was the clause. My clause. The one that said, terminate Claire without cause and the license revokes. Of course, no one wanted to admit they hadn't read it, or that they'd fired me with nothing but a hoodie and a juice card. And me? I was sitting on my balcony, sipping wine, watching the sun dip behind the city skyline. I didn't need to lift a finger, because the beauty of a well-built clause is this. It doesn't scream. It doesn't fight. It just waits. And when the timing is right, it detonates quietly, leaving everyone else scrambling in the smoke. Monolith wasn't done digging, and the deeper they went, the closer they came to the truth. Viron didn't own the very system they were trying to sell for $50 million. The investors would soon realize it. And when they did, all the pastel blazers, buzzwords, and motivational hoodies in the world wouldn't save Kenzie. And that was the part that made me smile. Not revenge, not gloating. Just restoration. The system protecting itself. The day of the Series B pitch arrived like a storm everyone pretended not to see coming. I hadn't planned on being there, but Monolith Capital's lead investor, Gregory Watts, personally requested my presence. For continuity, he called it. The board agreed, too flustered, too desperate to argue. Kenzie didn't know until I walked into the lobby that morning. Her smile cracked for a split second, like a pane of glass under strain. Then she pulled it back, plastered on a performance grin, and swept past me as if I were invisible. I didn't mind. I wasn't there for her. The boardroom was all glass and hubris. 27 floors up, panoramic views of the bay, a conference table big enough to land a helicopter on. The kind of place designed to impress investors with views instead of numbers. Monolith's team entered quietly, tailored suits and cool expressions. Gregory sat at the head, calm, deliberate, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Kenzie took the floor like it was a stage. Cream blazer, designer heels, and one of those oversized water bottles with motivational timestamps. Her slides were polished within an inch of their life. Animations, graphs, buzzwords stacked like a Jenga tower. At Viron, she purred, clicker in hand, we don't just build platforms. We architect trust. I saw one of the Monolith analysts raise an eyebrow. For an investor, that's basically a scream. The presentation rolled on. Culture-forward architecture, emotional throughput, scalable empathy. Not a word about the actual back-end stability. Not a whisper about the operational chaos boiling under the hood. Then Gregory opened his diligence folder. Slowly, page by page, no interruptions, just the sound of paper against paper. The room's temperature seemed to drop with each turn. Kenzie's phone, face down on the table, lit up. 12 missed calls from legal. She ignored it, kept smiling, kept talking about team cohesion and retention rates. But then Gregory raised a hand. The room froze. Before we go further, he said, voice calm, precise. We need clarification. Kenzie's smile faltered. Of course, she replied, tone an octave higher. Gregory slid one page forward. A termination memo. My termination memo. This document states that Claire Ray was terminated for negativity and misalignment with culture. Is that accurate? Yes. Kenzie nodded too quickly. It was a leadership call. A cultural fit issue. Reviewed by internal counsel? Gregory asked, eyes steady. Kenzie hesitated. The CEO shifted uncomfortably. Legal stared at the table. Gregory didn't press. He simply turned to the next page and held it up with 2 fingers. A letter. My letter. Formally notarized, dated last week. Clause 14.3A notification. He read, revoking all back-end platform licensing effective the moment Ms. Ray was improperly terminated. The silence was suffocating. Kenzie's knuckles whitened against the edge of the table. Her eyes flicked to her father, then back to Gregory, then down at her phone again as if the screen might offer a way out. Gregory's voice didn't rise. He didn't need it to. This clause is clear. Licensing of Viren's core infrastructure is contingent upon continued employment of Claire Ray. Termination without documented cause revokes that license immediately. The general counsel, pale as paper, stood so fast his chair skidded back into the glass wall. He snatched the clause from Gregory's hand, eyes wide. How did this get signed? He whispered. I spoke for the first time. Calm, even. I drafted it. Your department approved it during vendor consolidation last year. It passed review. The CEO's face drained of color. Kenzie opened her mouth, hands flailing. This is a technicality. No. Gregory cut in, sharper now. This is ownership. He tapped the projection screen still displaying Q1 2026 roadmap. What you're pitching here assumes platform stability. But without this license, you don't own your own product, which means every investor in this room is being shown vaporware. The room didn't breathe. The CTO buried his face in his hands. The VP of sales walked to the window like he was considering jumping. The CFO muttered something about, she warned us. The CEO reached for his water glass, missed, nearly spilled the pitcher. His hands trembled. Gregory stood, smoothed his jacket. Congratulations, he said quietly, his words slicing sharper than any shout. You just lost your company. Kenzie half rose from her chair. Wait, we can fix this. We'll talk to her lawyer. But no one was listening anymore. The board erupted, voices overlapping, binders slamming, accusations flying. Someone shouted, why didn't anyone flag this clause? And me? I sat still in the back row, neutral expression. Hoodie folded neatly under my arm like a souvenir. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk, just waited. Because the truth was already doing the work for me. The collapse had begun. The boardroom didn't explode. Not at first. Shock isn't loud. It's heavy. A silence so thick you can hear every breath, every shift of a chair. Then the eruption came. Voices colliding, binders slamming open. A pen thrown so hard it clattered across the glass table. One board member shouted, why didn't anyone flag this clause? Another hissed, she warned us. The CFO looked sick, pale and sweating. The CEO sat slumped, staring at the termination memo like it was written in a foreign language. His hands shook as he muttered, this can't be happening. But it was. Because when you build a company on slogans, nepotism, and Instagram filters instead of substance, all it takes is one forgotten clause to bring it down. Kenzie was still flailing, her cream blazer askew, her voice climbing higher with each word. This is just a misunderstanding. We can negotiate. We'll fix it. But no one looked at her. She was background noise now. Gregory didn't even raise his voice. He simply slid the clause across the table like it was a final exam graded in red ink. Without this license, he said evenly, Viren has no product. Which means you have no company. Our position is clear. Then he turned to me. Just a glance, steady and knowing. A nod. And he walked out. The sound of the glass doors closing behind Monolith's team felt like a coffin lid sealing shut. No one moved to stop them. I stood slowly, hoodie tucked under my arm like a reminder of where this all began. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I walked toward the exit. No dramatics, no last speech, just calm control. As I passed the catering table, I paused, looked down at the hoodie. company logo screen printed like a participation trophy. I dropped it in the trash without a second glance. The hallway outside was quiet, bright, peaceful. That's when my phone buzzed. A new email. Subject line, "Let's talk acquisition. Your terms." I exhaled. Slow, steady. Not exhaustion. Release. Because here's the truth. Revenge wasn't the point. Not really. It wasn't about humiliating Kenzie or watching the CEO squirm. It was about restoration. For months, years even, I'd watched real work get erased. I'd watched competence pushed aside for connections. I'd watched someone who contributed nothing siphon resources, steal credit, and smile through every lie. And when I raised concerns, I was told to focus on positive forward momentum. Translation, shut up and let the rot spread. That day with the hoodie and the juice card? That wasn't just an insult. It was an attempt to erase everything I had built. My systems, my legacy, my worth. So I built protection into the very bones of the company. A clause that didn't scream, didn't fight, just waited. And when they pushed me out without cause, they triggered it themselves. The collapse wasn't me swinging an axe. It was them cutting through their own support beams. All I did was step aside and let gravity do the rest. Walking out of that building, I realized something. The most powerful response to betrayal isn't anger. Anger makes you reckless. It feeds the narrative that you're bitter, unstable, replaceable. The real power is calm, preparation, patience. Because silence makes people nervous. Documentation keeps you safe. And sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people trip over the traps they set for themselves. I didn't need to scream or post cryptic goodbyes on LinkedIn. I didn't need to prove them wrong in words. I had already done it in structure, in contracts, in systems that outlasted their slogans. By the time Monolith walked away, by the time Kenzie's frantic voice cracked under the weight of her own lies, by the time the CEO dropped his glass and clutched his chest, I had already won. Not because I destroyed them, but because I protected myself. That's the message I carry, and the one I want you to remember. When someone tries to erase your worth, don't waste your energy fighting their narrative. Build your own foundation. Document. Prepare. Protect. Because the quietest moves, the ones no one notices until it's too late, are often the most powerful. I stepped into the elevator, doors sliding shut behind me, leaving the chaos upstairs to devour itself. My phone buzzed again. Another email, another opportunity. And I smiled. Not the smile HR fears, not the smile of someone plotting revenge. The smile of someone who finally got their restoration.